So, in case I run out of time and get cut off, let me just get straight to the message that I want to end on. And my message is that I would like everyone to get into lots and lots of fights, get into more fights, engage in conflict. Not conflict of the violent and destructive kind, but constructive conflict. Areas of differences and disagreements that we may shy away from in the name of peace and harmony, stuff that we shove under the carpet or put a lid on, sometimes with toxic positivity, until they bubble over and they cause uncontrollable damage. We need to engage with them a lot earlier, a lot sooner, rather than later. Our ability to get comfortable with and engage in constructive conflict can help us develop resistance to conflict of the more incendiary kind. It may also give us a booster shot in our ability to resist the forces of polarization, the forces of us and them, extremism at times that operate on us and on our insecurities, whether it's in politics or in social media or elsewhere. We've had a really good run in the 30 years or so since I was sitting there, since I graduated from high school. The Cold War had just ended. We embarked on a path of globalization that seemed like the whole world was converging towards the same end point. Everyone was going to eat the same hamburgers, we were going to all listen to the same songs, watch the same TV shows. Growing up, I lived in Bangladesh, in the Middle East, in Africa. At work, I looked after global teams based out of both Europe and Asia. I'm married to a Singaporean Chinese Christian, and like many of you, I am the poster child of a global citizen. I studied and boarded at the birthplace of the United World Colleges movement in Wales, who were also the co-creators of the International Baccalaureate Diploma. I was exposed to international understanding. Many of my prejudices, my overt prejudices, diminished. I learned to recognize, tolerate, and appreciate diversity. And without knowing it explicitly at the time, I was the vanguard of the belief that as the world gets flatter, the world gets better. Surely no two countries with a McDonald's or a Starbucks in them will ever go to war with each other. That was the belief. Today, I'm not so sure. To echo the theme of today's TEDx, entanglements. Making connections is not enough. We need to work through entanglements. And I think we went wrong on at least two areas, in at least two ways. The first, we assumed, certainly I assumed, that diversity and inclusion are the same thing. I assumed that you just need to bring people together in the same room and watch the magic of diversity play out. Unfortunately, as the economists would put it, diversity is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for inclusion. In fact, the proxies of diversity, if they are superficial, when we only look at, say, race or gender and we stop there, we may provide a fig leaf for non-inclusive practices. And more generally, there are behavioral biases that we're all exposed to, and we need to have deliberate and conscious processes to ensure that diverse voices around the table are truly included in a given setting. And if this is of interest to you, there's some good material online. There's a particular paper online that takes the acronym inclusion, INCLUSION, and uses that as a way to look at how we can cultivate inclusive leadership at the workplace, particularly in a global hub like Singapore. But I want to go back to constructive conflict, because that's the second of the two things that I think we missed out on. over the last few decades. I failed to appreciate in these few decades that it was perhaps a little bit too easy for me to throw around the word global. It's not uncommon to find people in London and New York whose job title is global head, with virtually no experience of operating outside of those cities. For a long time, I assumed that global basically means anything that feels native and normal to me. Surely the world must converge to my way of doing things, what I'm comfortable with. More significantly, I started to call my values global values. And sometimes I'd even call them universal values, to indicate that they are the only values worth upholding, and anyone else who doesn't share that is prejudiced, is parochial, is a plebeian. And in my bubble of progressive enlightenment, I fail to see how some people might resent global citizens as citizens of nowhere. The fact is, whatever the net outcome, globalization does produce winners and losers. And even if we agree on universal values, we don't apply them to everyone in equal measures at all times. We all have affinity bias. You just have to look at any one of the hot, tragic conflicts that are raging in the world right now. We sympathize more with one set of victims over another. We're more outraged by atrocities committed by one versus the other, depending on who we consider to be more like us. That's not hypocrisy, that's just reality. And we can't even be objective in sports. Anyone here watch the Cricket World Cup? You do. My definition of fair play in cricket depends very much on whether I support Bangladesh or Sri Lanka. So we have differences, and we will have differences, some at a fundamental level, and some depending on the context. And in those contexts, simply papering over differences, bringing together diverse people, having them engage, is not sufficient. Diversity and conflict are bedfellows. But the purpose of diversity is not to homogenize, not to convert someone to my point of view, to my style of thinking, to put preconditions in place before I will engage with someone, to cancel someone unless they feel outrage or condemn the exact same things that I do. Constructive conflict is the art of working with others in spite of differences, through enduring differences, and in the presence of a genuinely wide range of diversity. So this is the meta capability of constructive conflict that we need to learn and to nurture. It's a necessary condition for us to be able to tackle some of the pressing global challenges, such as climate change, that can only be tackled with collaboration. It's collaboration across divides, collaboration through differences, collaboration in spite of conflict. So that's my theory of change. How exactly do we learn to do that, is the question. I don't know for sure, but high school education might be a good place to start. There's a growing body of knowledge, growing body of research from the world of academia, psychology, anthropology, even marital counseling, that can be turned into tools and hacks of constructive conflict. There's a rich catalog of experiences from around the world where innovative users of theater, business, social enterprise have helped bridge conflict. And all of this can form part of the curriculum of diplomas, such as perhaps the International Baccalaureate. That way, international understanding is not just about passive tolerance of each other, but it's about actual action across boundaries towards common goals. And there's pedagogic work that's already underway. In the meantime, I wanted to leave you with a list of reminders that I find useful to look at when I want to practice constructive conflict in my own contexts. not always successfully. So there are 7 rules of the Fight Club, if you like. So let's count through them one by one. Number 1, I accept that conflict is natural. There's nothing unnatural about it. Anything worth having, there's more demand than supply, so there's going to be conflict. However, when conflict arises, my responsibility is for my own actions, my own beliefs, and that responsibility is greater than the need to assign blame, to resist the temptation to set preconditions or to cancel the other. I'd rather cancel myself and leave the room than do that. So that's number 1. Number 2, I recognize that not all conflict is about winning or point scoring. I want to stay open to learning. Perhaps there's something I don't know. I will suspend judgment. I'll ensure that we preserve the dignity of the other person. We will consciously give dignity in conflict. So that's number 2. Number 3, I will actively listen to what the other person is saying, not just try and think about what I will say, what my rebuttal will be while the other person is speaking. Number 4, I will isolate the person from the topic of disagreement. So just because you disagree with me on something doesn't mean that I will immediately question your integrity and your motivation. Number 5, I will compartmentalize the issues of disagreement. So I will not carry over. If you disagree with me on one topic, doesn't mean that I have to disagree with you on another one just to retaliate. Number 6, I will avoid label-based prejudice or sweeping generalizations, about your kind or about groups of people just because I have differences with one individual. And finally, I will look for the opportunity in conflict. Is there a way to go beyond resolution of this particular conflict to a higher solution than what existed before? So with these rules as guardrails, I'd like us to engage in as many conflicts as we can. Well-meaning missions can hit brick walls of resistance from others who are equally well-meaning. It's usually not a clear-cut case of hero and villain. In a world that's now more fraught with fragmentation, polarizing passions, we need leaders, and that's you guys over there, who are introspective, who are circumspect, in a way that you can act as bridge builders. You can bridge between perhaps the populist rabble-rousers on the one hand and the virtue-signaling cancel culture on the other. Internationally, we need you to help create common ground between competing systems, political systems and economic systems, with more pragmatism, perhaps less ideology, and more inclusion of competing perspectives. The version of international understanding that I grew up with has run its course. It's time for your version to take center stage, and I'm very excited about that. Keep fighting the good fight to help us avoid the really bad ones. Thank you very much for your time.